Fazbear Frights, Volume 7, The Cliffs, Epilogue 7. Larson heard it before he saw it, and when he did hear it, he couldn't believe how it had managed to form behind him without him hearing it. The sounds were ear-splitting. Larson's initial thought was that a train was barreling down on him. The clatter, rumble, blast, and shriek that now made him whirl around defied his ability to process the noise. He had no better success with what he was seeing, but he couldn't even try to process that. He just ran. Barreling out of the shelter of the factory, leaving his sedan and the garbage bag behind, Larson raced toward the dock. Realizing it provided no cover, he veered back toward the building, to the overhang that sheltered an old forklift. Crouching next to the forklift, he peeked into the factory. Yep, he wasn't going mad. He'd seen what he thought he'd seen, but it hadn't started chasing him yet. It seemed to still be deciding what form to take. It continued to coalesce into the most abominable thing Larson had ever encountered. Transfixed by the strange mass consolidating in front of him, Larson's feet were rooted to the ground. His awareness, however, honed by years of detective work, reached out beyond the scrap metal beast. He spotted subtle movement near the trash compactor. It was a little more than a twitch at first, but then the twitch turned into a vibration, and the Stitchwraith climbed out of the tight wad of trash. Still a little disoriented from his battle with the rabbit creature and his temporarily compressed state, Jake wanted only to curl up and sleep someplace safe. He was so tired, but he couldn't rest yet. The man Jake had seen earlier, the detective, was nearby, and he was in trouble. As soon as Jake climbed out of the trash compactor, he had full awareness of what was going on in the factory. Part of his awareness came from normal senses. He could see the trash monster building itself up larger and larger. He could hear the clanking, thumping, and clattering of metal latching onto metal. The rest of his awareness, however, came from something he didn't understand. He just knew the detective was nearby and was in terrible danger. Jake also knew something else. He knew he was in danger too. Completely against his will, Jake's metal body began to skim across the concrete toward the trash being. It felt like Jake was caught in an alien spaceship's tractor beam, except he wasn't being towed into the sky. He was being sucked into the horrible metal man-thing. Jake immediately put all his strength into fighting the pull. After just a few seconds, he was able to stop his forward motion. Around him, animatronic parts and trash whizzed past and glommed onto the massive body forming from the garbage. Jake, though, stayed fast, committing himself to remaining separate from the evil entity. And because he was Jake, a boy who tried to help anyone who needed it, he also extended his intention to the other animatronic debris being vacuumed up by the junkyard fiend. He did all he could to save the other parts from falling under the thing's control. He'd managed to hold back a few arms and legs and joints and screws, but suddenly he felt the resistance of mangled metallic skeletal remains. Something was fighting against him. It wanted to be absorbed by the whole. Jake managed to keep himself planted as he turned to see what had enough self-awareness that it could choose to join the bulging trash being. For a few seconds, the debris roiling around him remained locked in chaotic movement. But then he spied a battered, rusting, vaguely female-shaped endoskeleton with a long neck crawling away from the other rubbish. Jake immediately tried to reach whatever was controlling the girl endoskeleton. "Let me save you," he called to her with his mind. At first, he got no response, but then his mind was filled with the sound of high-pitched laughter. It was a creepy cackling that skittered through his whole being. Before Jake could react to the sound, and whatever it meant, the girl endoskeleton's crawl turned into a disturbingly quick slither. Scraping across the floor, the girl endoskeleton shot toward Jake. Jake's inner resources were a little played out, given that he was still fighting the tug of the trash monster. He could do little to resist when the girl endoskeleton suddenly sprang off the ground and hit him full on, knocking him to the ground. Jake couldn't feel the impact, of course, but it still stunned him. For a few seconds, he couldn't move. He found himself eye to eye with a corroded face whose mouth was stretched into a poisonous smile that looked anything but friendly. The smile supercharged Jake's need to get free. He immediately tried to throw off his attacker, but she didn't budge. Instead, she pinned him with extraordinary strength, and her round, animatronic eyes started to glow white-hot. The glaring light began to bore through Jake's dull eyes, searing into him, reaching deep inside. The moment the light drilled into him, Jake felt the same evil he'd fought in the trash compactor. Only this evil felt stronger, like it was the core of what Jake had sensed in the things Andrew had infected. Jake also felt something else. Some of that badness was inside of him. He hadn't noticed it before, but now it was unmistakable. A piece of the evil he'd battled, cold and cruel, had been hiding in Jake's spirit. Just as it had hitched a ride in Andrew, it had apparently burrowed its way into Jake as well. Jake didn't like having the nasty girl endoskeleton so close to him, but he was happy for her to take away the yuck he could feel within him. It was leaving now, returning to its source, the girl thing drawing the energy out of him with her burning gaze. Jake felt it the instant the evil left him, but even if he hadn't felt it, he'd have known. The girl endoskeleton looked somehow brighter now, less rusty. Taking back that part of her had made her stronger. As if acknowledging Jake's awareness, the girl thing cocked her metal skull and winked at him. It was a slow-motion wink, filled with what looked like gleeful triumph. Then the girl endoskeleton let go of Jake and flew backward, allowing herself to be absorbed into the horrid metal giant. Mesmerized by the bizarre osmosis of robotic parts, including one full female-shaped endoskeleton that had attacked the Stitchwraith before releasing itself to the trash amalgamation, Larson hadn't managed to move from where he hid. Now, however, the trash thing took a step forward, and it stared right at Larson. The moment the rabbit-shaped fusion of trash met Larson's gaze, Larson was able to accept what he'd known when he first watched the monster put itself together. The thing was Afton. Even though the rabbit was made up of disturbingly arranged animatronic parts and was twice a normal man's size, it exuded William Afton's unmistakable energy. In a way, the patchwork face resembled photos Larson had seen of the serial killer, as if Afton had the power to shape other material into his own countenance. Afton's amalgamation took another step forward. Larson, appalled by his stupid inaction, muttered, "Crap." He looked around. If he ran now, he could slip between the next building to the north and get away. But he looked beyond the immediate buildings and the lake. The district was surrounded by old neighborhoods. The kind of neighborhoods with two-story houses, gnarled oak trees, and children. Ryan's voice spoke in his head. "Teachers say dads are like superheroes, but you're not. Superheroes don't break promises." Ryan was right. Superheroes didn't break promises, and Larson wanted to be Ryan's superhero. Today, he could do that by keeping his promise to the city, his promise to protect and serve. He was not going to run away. He had to stop this thing before it got out. But how? Larson looked around. He cataloged what he saw. The factory currently incubating a creature from the underworld. Dock and lake behind the factory. An empty field to the left of the factory, beyond which lay houses in which little boys like his Ryan were playing video games, building forts, doing homework, or wishing their dads were at home. How could he fight something powered by such evil? Before he could answer that question, the creature that looked like both a man-shaped pile of junk and a deformed rabbit turned and went deeper into the factory. What was it doing? Larson crept out from behind the forklift and sidled through the entryway. Reaching his sedan, he crouched and listened. He noticed the bag of parts he left on the ground by his open driver's side door. He grabbed the bag. He had a feeling he might need it. Inside the building, the thing crunched and huffed. Looping the bag around his wrist as he'd done earlier, Larson ran toward the sound. Although following the sound was easy, understanding it was harder. The noises Larson was hearing kept changing. Maybe they shifted when the thing's parts shifted. Sometimes the sound was a chittering noise. Sometimes it was a crackle. Sometimes it was the fingers on a chalkboard caterwaul of metal being torn from metal. It was always something that made Larson forget to breathe. But he didn't stop moving. He couldn't. Following the sounds, he went past the trash compacting room and found himself in a wide hallway. A series of what looked like storage rooms or equipment rooms opened up off the hallway. From the now squalling and skidding sounds ahead of him, he knew he was going in the right direction. The skidding devolved into a snarling, wet popping sound. It reminded Larson of the autopsies he sometimes had to attend. A corpse made a similar sound when its ribcage was being parted and its organs were being removed. Larson felt his stomach turn against the roast beef sandwich he'd had for lunch, but he commanded the sandwich to stay where it was. The hallway turned a corner, and Larson hesitated. He waited until the squishy taps moved farther away from him. Then he sidled around a corner. The second he looked ahead, he almost turned and ran. Hulking shadows skated along the walls of the hallway in front of him. The shadows, like the rabbit monster, were in perpetual motion. They rose and fell, billowed and contracted. They looked alive, and for all Larson knew, they were. No matter. He had to go on. Larson took another step, and another. Afton's amalgamation crashed through the interior wall of the hallway. Larson attempted to leap forward to clear the thing's line of sight, but he wasn't fast enough. He had just a second, if that, to register the appalling composite of animatronic body parts and faces that came at him with the speed of a race car and the force of a battering ram. Did he just see an eye on a kneecap? And was that kneecap where a shoulder should have been? Had feet been protruding from the thing's neck? And did the feet have mouths? How many mouths had he just seen? Dozens? He didn't have time to answer any of these questions before he was hurled not just into, but through the other hallway wall. Aware of only pain as he flew through the air, he collided with something hard, and then he felt nothing. As soon as the trash monster had integrated the girl endoskeleton, it had turned away and clomped into the factory's interior. It hadn't given Jake even a glance as it passed him. It apparently had enough parts to be satisfied. For a few seconds after the metal man thing had disappeared from Jake's view, Jake considered running away, but he couldn't. The detective was still here, and he was still in danger. Jake had to help. So Jake made himself get up and follow the monster. It wasn't hard to do. It was making a racket. Jake ran toward the sound. Piercing jabs of light stabbed at the blackness that surrounded Larson. He squeezed his eyes shut and moaned. Why couldn't he be left in peace? His head pounded. Touching his forehead, he felt a knot above his left eyebrow, and his fingers came away wet. His chest and his side throbbed too. He was sure he'd cracked a rib or two, maybe more. He felt warm wetness at his side. Maybe he did more than crack a rib. Maybe he broke one and it pierced his skin. Or maybe something sharp had cut him. He was barely aware of leaning against something jagged and hard. Some kind of equipment? Maybe he'd been cut on that. Voices whispered at him in the dark. Their words capered around the flashes of light in his head. He screwed up his forehead, both to combat and the throbbing pain in his skull, and to help him focus on what the words meant. He suddenly remembered how he got into this place of darkness and light, of pain and whispering voices. Afton's amalgamation. He stiffened. Where was it? Hurry. That was one of the words in his head. Or were the words in his head? Were they outside his head? If they were outside his head, where were they coming from? It sounded like children whispering. Or did it? His left ear burned like he'd been slapped hard on the side of the head. His right ear felt like it was filled with cotton. The whispers rose and fell. He could see the words in his mind like ballet dancers spinning and leaping and dipping. Then 3 words joined together in perfect choreography. Open your eyes, they said. Larson did. Afton was standing over him. So close. Too close. Larson looked into the enormous face hovering above his own. It was a face of nightmares, with eyes made of metal sockets and spark plugs. A mouth formed long pistons and cheekbones composed of large gears and bolts. The face seemed to be held together with bits of pointed metal, rusted pipes, and what appeared to be actual bone, but not the bones one would expect to see in a face. An animatronic elbow acting as a chin was attached with a rat's skeleton, and a brow made from part of a motor was affixed by a bird's foot. As repulsive as all of this was, though, it wasn't the metal junk that sent chills skittering down Larson's spine. The truly repugnant thing about Afton's new face was that it was in motion. Tucked in and around the metal scrap and bone, animatronic parts wriggled and writhed, and they were singing, or at least that's what it sounded like. Larson could hear a harmonized chorus. Various parts of it seemed to be coming from Afton's spinning ankle joint nose, shimmying shoulder socket forehead, and tapping metal foot jaws. Each of Afton's ears was made of a different animatronic part. One ear was 3/4 of a metal hand, and the other ear was a metal jaw. Both the hand and the jaw were moving in time of the music, which seemed to be snippets from the old floor shows the Freddy's animatronics used to do. Thankfully, Larson didn't have time to examine Afton's makeshift face any further, because Afton's amalgamation raised a hand that was actually a foot and a hip joint. Larson lunged to his right, but he wasn't fast enough. The sharp metal toes of the foot Afton was using as a hand impaled Larson's belly. Larson cried out when hot pain shot through his gut and radiated across his entire torso, but he was able to jerk free and stagger out from the hideous thing's reach. Grabbing his lower belly, Larson felt the warmth flow between his fingers, down over his right hip bone as he busted out of the room he'd been thrown into and ran down the hall to the south exit of the warehouse.